Right now, right this very minute, I suspect that there's probably a lot more going on in your mind than simply wondering what it is I want to talk about in this sermon. I mean, school's starting up. Some of you kids in here went back to school this week. For some of you, school is starting up this coming week. And so if you've got children or grandchildren, school's about to launch in full swing. And I think it's fair to say there has not been a start of school like this one that I can remember. And I think you would say the same thing. In fact, I don't think there's been a year like this one that we've gone through, you know? I mean, every single day I talk to people who are worried. They're worried about something. They're worried about what tomorrow's going to bring. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about whether their kids might contract the virus. They're worried about other people in their family. They're worried about how our community will survive if fall football is canceled. They're worried about how their life is gonna be over the coming months and weeks if things don't quickly improve. I hear people worried about the election. They're just worried about so many things. I talk to pastors who are worried about what their church is going to be like when COVID-19 isn't the top of every news story 24 hours a day. They're worried about whether people are going to come back. They're worried about what normal is going to look like on the other side of all of this mess. I think it's safe to say that right now is an unsettling place to be in. I mean, let's face it, we've been going through this thing for 5 months. And most of that 5 months, we've been socially distanced. I mean, some people have hardly left their houses over the last 5 months. We mostly see each other's eyes. People don't shake hands. People don't touch. I mean, our interpersonal connections have been reduced to brief interactions where people talk from behind a mask and they keep their distance from one another. And I've even been around some people who seem to even be scared to be even 6 feet from another person. Because of all this, some studies are showing today, in fact, quite a few studies have shown that symptoms of stress, loneliness, depression, even PTSD have been higher than they've seen in years. So what I want to know right now is this. What is life like for you right now? What is life like for you right now? Are you settled? Are you overwhelmed? Are you worried? Are you stressed? Are you confused? Are you anxious? Are you at peace? Are you confident? Are you unsure? What is life like for you right now? And then let me ask this. Where is God for you in the midst of all of this? I mean, where is God? And keep in mind, that is not a throwaway question. In fact, I think your answer to that question about God, your answer to that question about God significantly impacts the way you're going to react to whatever it is that is right now for you at any time in your life. So let's talk about God. Before we go any further, I want to share this with you. And what I'm about to say is really the underlying premise of this entire message this morning. And it is this. Your concept of God defines the way you will respond to any and all circumstances in your life. Period. There is no gray in this statement. I believe this to be fact. Your concept of God, your understanding of who God is in your life and in the cosmos, your concept of God defines the way you're going to respond to any and all circumstances you will ever face during the course of your life. I heard a story the other day about Robert Dick Wilson. He was the professor of Old Testament at Princeton Seminary at the turn of the 20th century. From 1900 to 1924, he was a professor of the Old Testament at Princeton. And one of his students at the time was a young man who would become a great preacher and great theologian. His name was Donald Gray Barnhouse. Some of you may have heard that name. Tommy was telling me this morning he has an entire set of commentaries on the Bible written by Donald Gray Barnhouse. And it just so happened that 12 years after Barnhouse graduated from seminary, he was invited to come back to preach in the chapel. And so when he stepped into the pulpit to preach that morning, he looked out over the congregation that had gathered, and there on the front row was his Old Testament professor, Dr. Wilson, sitting there ready to hear him preach. And when the sermon was over, Dr. Wilson walked up to Barnhouse and shook his hand, and he said this. He said, "If you ever come back again, I'm not going to hear you preach. I only come once." He said, "I am glad that you're a big Godder." He said, "When my boys come back, I always like to come and listen to them preach to see whether they're big Godders or little Godders, and then I know how their ministry is going to be." Barnhouse didn't quite understand what he meant by all of that, and so he asked him to explain, and Dr. Wilson then said this. He said, "Well, some men have a little God, and they're always in trouble with him. He can't do any miracles. He doesn't intervene on behalf of his people. They have a little God, and I call them little Godders." He said, "Then there are those who have a great God. He speaks, and it's done. He commands, and it stands fast. He knows how to show himself strong on behalf of those who fear him." And then Dr. Wilson looked at Barnhouse, and he smiled, and he said, "You're a big Godder. And I know God is going to bless your ministry, so God bless you." So I want to ask you right here, right now, how is it with you with respect to your understanding of who God is? Are you a big Godder, or are you a little Godder? Now, I'm just going to say right here and right now, I don't know if there's a more important question for any of us to answer during this right now of our lives than that question. Are you a big Godder or a little Godder? I think about little Godders. They pray little prayers. They have little faith. Preachers who are little Godders, they preach little sermons. Little Godders, they step back when problems rise up. Little Godders think in their heart of hearts that they really don't need a big God to help them make it through life. I mean, they think that they're smart enough and they're talented enough and they're gifted enough to handle whatever comes their way. They don't believe, little Godders that is, they don't believe that they need to pray about what's right in front of them because they're good enough. They can get it. They can take care of it. They can handle it. In his book entitled Not God Enough, Pastor J.D. Greer tells about one of the main reasons for his lack of faith sometimes, and his passionless heart that comes out sometimes, and his difficulty in surrendering to God. He tells that all of those are symptoms of his limited vision for who God is. This is what he wrote. He said, "Early on in my life," he said, "I assumed that the God behind it all was just a slightly bigger, slightly smarter, slightly better version of me." He says, I thought he would act in ways that I could comprehend and easily follow. And when I couldn't, it made me wonder if he was even there. Greer says, "I am in part the product of a Christian culture that has fostered and promoted a small, domesticated view of God. The Western Christianity in which I've been immersed," he says, "focuses on the practicality of faith. We present God as the best way to have a happy and prosperous life. We show how God is the best explanation for the unanswered questions in our lives and how he is the best means for the life we desire." And then he says, our worship services seem more like pep rallies accompanied by practical tips for living rather than encounters with the living God who stands beyond time and whose presence is indescribably glorious. He says these shallow glimpses of God, as long as our faith remains untested, they'll do fine for us. He says, but they are utterly insufficient in the midst of unanswered questions and intense suffering. Those are words from a person who confesses to, at times, being a little Godder. And there's another thing about little Godders that I want to say. For little Godders, success can be devastating, at least to their spirit. Because little Godders, if success comes, for little Godders, they believe that success has come because they did it. They made it happen. They were good enough, smart enough, talented enough to bring about that success. And so what happens is, the greater the success grows, the littler their God becomes, to the point at which he becomes just inconsequential in the little Godder's life. I like what Evelyn Underhill, she's was a famous writer about worship. She says this about our small views of God. She says, a God small enough to be understood will never be big enough to be worshiped. I want you to think about that. A God small enough to be understood will never be big enough to be worshiped. I remember when I was at high school, the summer between high school and college, I went on a European choir tour with my high school choir and another choir from Klein. And one evening during that choir tour, I was sitting on the balcony of my hotel with my roommate, and he was a student from Klein, and we were looking at the starry sky. Did I tell you we were in Switzerland? And we're sitting out on our balcony looking at the starry sky and the Swiss Alps in the background. And I was looking at it all, and I said to him, I said, I can't imagine how a person could look at all of this and not think of God. And he looked at me and he said, well, I can. I said, what do you mean? Now, you have to understand, this guy graduated from high school with a 4.0 before they had 5.0 scales. I mean, he was really, really smart. And he was going to go to college and become a scientist. And I found out the longer we talked that in his scientific mind, he could not conceive of a God who was beyond reason. He could not conceive of a God who was beyond anything that he could fit into his little box of understanding. He was a little Godder. In fact, he was such a little Godder, he didn't really have a concept of God at all. So how is it with you today? How is it with you right now? Are you a little Godder, or are you a big Godder? Now, before you answer that, let's talk about what the Bible says about God. And I'm going to just go ahead and give you a spoiler alert right now. The Bible is a big Godder book. It begins this way. Genesis 1, verse 1. First words in the book go like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Before there was anything, there was God. And all that is didn't just happen. He created everything. He created the heavens. He created the stars. He created the sun. He created the moon. He created the earth. He created everything. And he did it with a word. It didn't just happen, nor did he have some kind of formula that he was working through to try to figure out a way to make this match up with that and see what might happen. No, he spoke all that is into existence with a word. And he is still intimately involved in his creation. David said this in Psalm 139. He said, "O Lord, you've searched me and you know me. You know when I sit down and you know when I rise. You know my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all of my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. Oh Lord, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up into the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle into the farthest reaches of the sea, you are there. Your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast." That's a big God, wouldn't you say? He knows when you sit down. He knows when you rise up. He knows when you go out. He knows when you come in. I mean, before you even utter a word from your lips, He knows what that word's going to be. And you can't run from this big God of the Bible. You can't hide from this big God. Just ask Jonah. If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. No matter where you go, God is there to guide you. He's there to go with you. Do you believe in a God like that? I mean, do you believe in a God who is that big? Now, I want to take this a step further. And I want to invite you to do something. Tonight, after the sun goes down and it gets dark, and I want to invite you to do this with your kids. They can stay up this late. I want you to go out and I want you to look up into the dark sky and see the stars. Just look at the stars tonight. God made all those stars. He literally spoke them into existence. And what you're seeing as you look into the night sky is only a minuscule fraction of the number of stars that are in the universe. In fact, astronomers tell us that you can only really see about 9,000 of the stars that are in the heavens with your unaided eye. In fact, they estimate that there are over 3 septillion stars. Have you ever seen the number 3 septillion? That's a 3 with 24 zeros. This is the number. 3 septillion. That's how many stars there are. That's how massive the universe is that God created. And it continues to expand. In Psalm 19, verses 1 and 2, David said this. He said, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech, and night after night, they reveal knowledge." You look up into the night sky, and you examine the stars that you can see, and they tell the story themselves about this great God we have. They tell about the bigness of our God. Now, there are a couple of things I want to show you before we leave today. The first is something that I came across as I was working on this message, and it's an image from space. It's called the Whirlpool Galaxy. I think there it is, right there. This galaxy is known as the darling of the universe. The scientific name is Messier 51. And this galaxy is actually 31 million light years from where we are right now. 31 million light years. Now, I don't know if you know about a light year, but a light year measures the length that light travels during the course of a year. And light will travel 5.88 trillion miles in a year. So if you want to try to calculate what it'll take for you to get from here to that Whirlpool Galaxy, you have to multiply 31 million times 5.88 trillion, and you'll find out how many miles there are from here to the Whirlpool Galaxy. And then if you want to try to find out how long it's going to take, then you have to calculate that if you travel 186,000 miles per second for 31 million years, you'll finally get there. Can you imagine how many times your kids would ask, "Are we there yet?" And that galaxy, that Whirlpool Galaxy, has 300 billion stars in it. And that one galaxy is one of 100 billion galaxies in the universe. Now, I know I've used a lot of big numbers. And so, I don't know if you're like me, I have trouble grasping numbers like that. I mean, I have trouble grasping something that's over 1,000, much less 100. And so when I hear something like 31 million light years away, and when I hear that the actual distance is 5.88 trillion miles times 31 million, I don't even know what number that is. My kids would tell me that's a gajillion miles away. So to help grasp the magnitude of these numbers, I want to do this. I think all of us can grasp how long a second is. Can you grasp 10 seconds? I mean, it's about... Maybe that was 10 seconds, close to it. Now, so let me ask you this. Do you know how far back 1,000,000 seconds would take you? So if you were to count backwards 1,000,000 seconds, do you know how far back that is? It's 11 days. 11 days. Anybody remember what you were doing 11 days ago? Now, so that's 1,000,000 seconds. Let's talk about 1,000,000,000 seconds. Do you know what day it was 1,000,000,000 seconds ago? You think it was like a month ago? 3 months? 6 months? How about January 1989? That's 1,000,000,000 seconds ago. January of 1989. You guys weren't even born yet. So I wasn't even married yet. Now, how about 1,000,000,000,000 seconds? When do you think that's going to take? What do you think that's going to take you to? Like the 1700s? 1600s? How about 29,668 BC? That's 1,000,000,000,000 seconds. Now, I want you to think about that when you consider the number of stars. Multiply 1,000,000,000,000 times 3,000,000,000,000, and then you find out how many stars there are in the universe. And all of this happened in a single moment by a word from God. All of it. One moment by one word, and all of that came into existence. And then on top of that, the prophet Isaiah says that this big God who made all those stars, he calls each one of them by name. Because of his great power and his mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Not one of them. That's an amazing God, isn't it? Now get this. If you look inside that Whirlpool Galaxy that we were looking at earlier, the Hubble Space Telescope was able to look inside the core of that galaxy and see what was there. And scientists discovered that there's a black hole right in the middle of that galaxy. And the Hubble Space Telescope was able to take a picture of that. You know what it saw? It saw this. Can you believe this? What this says is, in the deepest reaches of space, in the middle of a huge galaxy, God placed a sign that says, "My grace reaches that far." It reaches that far. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so he has removed our sins from us. That's how big our God is. Now, there's another thing I want to share with you this morning, and it's something I heard several years ago. And before I do that, I want to just say a word to the kids. This is the best day for you kids to be in church today, because, I mean, you haven't been in school for a while. This is kind of like a refresher for being in school. You've had an astronomy lesson. Now you're about to have a biology lesson. Are you ready? Buckle up, okay? So I want to tell you about a protein that is located in our bodies. It's a protein called laminin. 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 Laminin is a cell adhesion molecule. Say that. Cell adhesion molecule. Say that one more time. Cell adhesion molecule. I want every one of your kids to go to your teacher tomorrow and say, "I learned about a cell adhesion molecule." And see what they say. In other words, so this laminin is the stuff that holds all of your cells together. So inside your body, you have all these cells, and they're held together by this protein called laminin. Have you ever seen laminin? I want to show you just a scientific diagram of laminin. Take a look. That's laminin. Now, if that doesn't make you go, oh my goodness, I don't know what will. Well, maybe there's something else that might make that happen for you. I want to show you what laminin looks like under an electron microscope. Here it is. Are you seeing this? In the deepest reaches of space, we see this. Not that, but this. In the deepest reaches of space, we see that. And in the deepest reaches of our cellular structure, we see this. Can you believe this? Paul wrote in Colossians 1:15, he says he's the image of the invisible God. He's talking about Jesus. He's the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, things visible, things invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All were created by him and for him. He is before all things. And hear this, he holds all things together. He holds all things together. I read that and I couldn't help but say, yes. Yes. His love and his power and his handiwork are everywhere. To the farthest reaches of space, to the deepest reaches of our human body, his stamp is everywhere. So what does this mean for you and me today? I believe it means that our God is big enough to impact your right now, right now. He is big enough to impact your right now, right now. It means that the right now you're going through right now, this may be the toughest season that you've ever had to endure during the course of your life. This means he's bigger than you right now. The God who placed his stamp in a black hole in a galaxy 31 million light years away, who also placed his stamp in a protein that holds your cells together. He's big enough for whatever it is that you're facing, for whatever it is that you're going through, for whatever it is that you're hearing, for whatever it is you're thinking. He's bigger. But you may be looking at your circumstances and you may be thinking, does he even care? Does he know what I'm facing right now? Does he know that I'm barely making it month to month? Does he know that the kind of fear I have inside? Does he know how hard it is for me to even be willing to have a conversation with someone? Does he know how hard it is for me to think about starting this school year? Because this is not anything like anything I've ever had to do before. Does he know? Do I even matter? Listen, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. This God who created all that is with a word. This God who placed a stamp in the farthest reaches of space, as well as the deepest reaches of our human cellular system. This God knit you together in your mother's womb. Before you took your first breath, he knew you, and he loved you, and he had a plan for you. You may be thinking, he can't possibly conceive. what I'm going through right now? Oh, yes, he can. Oh, yes, he can. Do you think he's that small? This is a big God we're talking about. This is a God who's bigger than anything that anybody could ever face. This is a God against whom nothing will ever be able to stand or prosper. He's that big. And he wants to speak into your right now. He wants to say, I'm here for you. I mean, think about it. This God who flung the cosmos into being with a word, at the very same time, he knows how many hairs you have on your head. And he knows what you're facing. He knows what's going on inside of you. Before you even speak a word, he knows what it's going to be. He's that big. So will you trust him? Are you willing to place your life in his hands and say, God, I know this is a tough season we're all going through. I know that there are some who predict that it's just going to get worse, but God, I believe that you're there. And I believe that you're carrying us through. And I believe you're going to see us through. I believe you're that big. Isaiah said it like this. He said, do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God. He's the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. In his understanding, no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary, and he increases the power of the weak. Even youths, even 18-year-olds are going to grow tired and weary. I love hearing that as a 53-year-old. Even youths are going to grow tired and weary. Young men are going to stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord, they will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and they will not faint, because we have a big God who is bigger than anything we could ever imagine. And he's big enough for anything that we might face. Will you trust him? Will you lean on him? Will you let him be your source of strength? And will you let him carry you today and tomorrow and every tomorrow hereafter? I hope you will. I believe in a big God. I'm a big Godder. I hope you will be too. Let's pray.